Antya 2.31 Gaur Gopal Mantra Tomar Chari Akshar Vaishnav Chada Jay Kari Acha Antar. You are chanting the Gaur Gopal mantra composed of 4 syllables. Now please give up the doubts that have resided within you. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains the Gaur Gopal mantra in his Amrita Prabhava Bhashya. Worshippers of Sri Gaura Sundar accept the 4 syllables Gaura Anga. It's Gaura Anga. 4. Count them 4. As the Gaura mantra, but pure worshippers of Radha and Krishna accept the 4 syllables Radha Krishna as the Gaur Gopal mantra. However, Vaishnavas consider Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu non-different from Radha Krishna. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Radha Krishna Nahi Anya. Therefore, one who chants the mantra Gauranga and one who chants the names of Radha Krishna are on the same level. Don't you love that? Thank you to all involved. Everyone okay? Okay. Continuing our reading of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3. We're on text chapter 14, Pregnancy of Diti in the evening. And we finished, started 35. Let me offer my obeisances unto the angry Lord Shiva, who is simultaneously the very ferocious great demigod and the fulfiller of all material desires. He is all auspicious and forgiving, but his anger can immediately move him to chastise. Purport. Diti prayed for the mercy of Lord Shiva very cleverly. She prayed, the Lord can cause me to cry, but if he likes, he can also stop my crying because he is Ashutosh. He is so great that if he likes, he can immediately destroy my pregnancy, but by his mercy he can also fulfill my desire that my pregnancy not be spoiled. Because he is all auspicious, it is not difficult for him to excuse me from being punished. Although he is now ready to punish me because I have moved his great anger. He appears like a man, but he is the Lord of all men. Let him be pleased with us, since he is my brother-in-law, the husband of my sister Sati. He is also the worshipable Lord of all women. He is the personality of all opulences and can show mercy towards women who are excused even by the uncivilized hunters. Purport. Lord Shiva is the husband of Sati, one of the sisters of Diti. Diti invoked the pleasure of her sister Sati so that Sati would request her husband to excuse her. Besides that, Lord Shiva is the worshipable Lord of all women. He is naturally very kind towards women, on whom even the uncivilized hunters also show their mercy. Since Lord Shiva is himself associated with women, he knows very well their defective nature, and he might not take very seriously Diti's unavoidable offense, which occurred due to her faulty nature. Every virgin girl is supposed to be a devotee of Lord Shiva. Diti remembered her childhood worship of Lord Shiva and begged his mercy. Maitreya said, O great sage Kashyapa, thus addressed his wife, who was trembling because of fear that her husband was offended. She understood that he had been dissuaded from his daily duties of offering evening prayers, yet she desired the welfare of her children in the world. The learned Kashyapa said, because of your minds being polluted, because of defilement of the particular time, because of your negligence of my directions, and because of your being apathetic to the demigods, everything was inauspicious. Purport. The conditions for having good progeny in society are that the husband should be disciplined in religious and regulative principles, and the wife should be faithful to the husband. In Bhagavad Gita 7:11, it is said that sexual intercourse according to religious principles, is a representation of Krishna consciousness. Before engaging in sexual intercourse, both the husband and wife must consider their mental condition, the particular time, the husband's direction, and obedience to the demigods. According to Vedic society, there is a suitable, auspicious time for sex life, which is called the time for Govardhan. Diti neglected all the principles of scriptural injunction, and therefore, although she was very anxious for auspicious children, she was informed that her children would not be worthy to be sons of a Brahmana. There is a clear indication herein that a Brahmana's son is not always a Brahmana. Personalities like Ravana and Hiranyakashipu were actually born of Brahmanas, but they were not accepted as Brahmanas because their fathers did not follow the regulative principles for their birth. Such children are called demons or Rakshasas. There were only one or two Rakshasas in the previous ages due to negligence of the disciplinary methods, but during the age of Kali, there is no discipline in sex life. How then can one expect good children? Certainly unwanted children cannot be a source of happiness in society, but through the Krishna consciousness movement they can be raised to the human standard by chanting the holy name of God. That is the unique contribution of Lord Chaitanya to human society. 39. O haughty one, you will have two contemptuous sons born of your condemned womb. Unlucky woman, they will cause constant lamentation to all the three worlds. Purport. Contemptuous sons are born of the condemned womb of their mother. In Bhagavad Gita 1.40 it is said, when there is deliberate negligence of the regulative principles of religious life, the women as a class become polluted, and as a result there are unwanted children. This is especially true for boys. If the mother is not good, there cannot be good sons. The learned Kashyapa could foresee the character of the sons who would be born in the condemned womb of Diti. The womb was condemned because of the mothers being too sexually inclined and thus transgressing all the laws and injunctions of the scriptures. In a society where such women are predominant, one should not expect good children. 40. They will kill poor, faultless living entities, torture women, and enrage the great souls. Demoniac activities are predominant when innocent, faultless living entities are killed, women are tortured, and the great souls engaged in Krishna consciousness are enraged. In a demoniac society, innocent animals are killed to satisfy the tongue, and women are tortured by unnecessary sexual indulgence. Where there are women and meat, there must be liquor and sex indulgence. When these are prominent in society, by God's grace, one can expect a change in the social order by the Lord himself or by his bona fide representative. 41. At that time, the Lord of the universe, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the well-wisher of all living entities, will descend and kill them, just as Indra smashes the mountains with his thunderbolts. Purport. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 4.8, the Lord descends as an incarnation to deliver the devotees and kill the miscreants. The Lord of the universe and everything would appear to kill the sons. The Lord of the universe and of everything would appear to kill the sons of Diti because of their offending the devotees of the Lord. There are many agents of the Lord, such as Indra, Chandra, Varuna, Goddess Durga, and Kali, who can chastise any formidable miscreants in the world. The example of mountains being smashed by a thunderbolt is very appropriate. The mountain is considered the most strongly built body within the universe, yet it can be easily smashed by the arrangement of the Supreme Lord. The Supreme Personality of Godhead does not need to descend in order to kill any strongly built body. He comes down just for the sake of his devotees. Everyone is subject to the miseries offered by material nature, but because the activities of miscreants, such as killing innocent people and animals or torturing women, are harmful, to everyone and are therefore a source of pain for the devotees, the Lord comes down. He descends only to give relief to his ardent devotees. The killing of the miscreant by the Lord is also the mercy of the Lord toward the miscreant, although apparently the Lord takes the side of the devotee. Since the Lord is absolute, there is no difference between his activities of killing the miscreants and favoring the devotees. Diti said, "It is very good that my sons will be magnanimously killed by the arms of the personality of Godhead with his Sudarshan weapon. O my husband, may they never be killed by the wrath of the Brahmana devotees." Purport. When Diti heard from her husband that the great souls would be angered by the activities of her sons, she was very anxious. She thought that her sons might be killed by the wrath of the Brahmanas. The Lord does not appear when the Brahmanas become angry at someone, because the wrath of the Brahmana is sufficient in itself. He certainly appears, however, when his devotee simply becomes sorry. A devotee of the Lord never prays to the Lord to appear for the sake of the troubles of the miscreant, for the sake of the troubles the miscreants cause for him, and he never bothers him by asking for protection. Rather, the Lord is anxious to give protection to the devotees. Diti knew well that the killing of her sons by the Lord would also be his mercy. And therefore she says that the wheel and arms of the Lord are magnanimous. If someone is killed by the wheel of the Lord and is thus fortunate enough to see the arms of the Lord, that is sufficient for his liberation. Such good fortune is not achieved even by the great sages. Text 43. A person who is condemned by a Brahmana or is always fearful to other living entities is not favored either by those who are already in hell or by those in the species in which he is born. Purport. A practical example of a condemned species of life is the dog. Dogs are so condemned that they never show any sympathy for their contemporaries. The learned Kashyapa said, "Because of your lamentation, penitence, and proper deliberation, and also because of your unflinching faith in the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and your adoration for Lord Shiva and me, one of the sons, Prahlad, of your son, Hiranyakashipu, will be an approved devotee of the Lord, and his fame will be broadcast equally with that of the Personality of Godhead." In order to follow in his footsteps, saintly persons will try to emulate his character by practicing freedom from animosity, just as the purifying processes rectify gold of inferior quality. Purport. Yoga practice, the process of purifying one's existential identity, is based mainly on self-control. Based mainly on what? Self-control. Correct. Without self-control, one cannot practice freedom from animosity. Without self-control, one cannot practice freedom from what? Animosity. In the conditioned state, every living being is envious of another living being, but in the liberated state, there is an absence of animosity. Look up the word, please. Prahlad Maharaj was tortured by his father in so many ways. Yet after the death of his father, he prayed for his father's liberation by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He did not ask any benediction that he might have asked. But he prayed that his atheistic father might be liberated. He never cursed any of the persons who engaged in torturing him at the instigation of his father. Animosity for 500, please. Yes. Yes. Ty goes the runner.
The Oxford Dictionary. Animosity, noun, strong hostility. For example, he no longer felt any animosity towards her. Origin, late Middle English. Originally in the sense spirit, or courage, from Old French animosity, cite, or late Latin animositas, from animosus, spirited.
What?
Spirited,
Spirited?
from Latin animus, spirit, comma, mind. The current sense dates from the early 17th
I couldn't
century.
hear that because of the bottle of, what is that brand? This is Larry. No wonder. All right, go ahead.
From Latin animus, that is spirit, comma, mind. The current sense dates from the early 17th century.
Related to animate? Life. Spirited. How did it turn into something so pejorative? If you see what I'm saying. Yes, Madhuri Saki's got more information.
It comes
We have
from,
a technical crew back here. Go ahead.
this is from the etymology dictionary. It comes
From
the,
what?
The online etymology dictionary.
Oh, okay. Etymology. Go ahead.
And it comes from the Proto-Indo-European root "ene," which means to breathe.
Means to what?
To breathe.
To breathe. Can you tell more about that from etymology? Does it trace back to Sanskrit?
It also says that it is directly from Latin animositatem, which means boldness or vehemence.
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 I was thinking inimical also sounds similar. It's different roots.
Different root.
Yeah.
Judges have ruled against you.
Somehow it gets mixed, I don't know. It also says it's from Sanskrit.
Give him the mic. He's got something.
It also says it is from Sanskrit. Aniti means breathes.
Means what? Breathes. Is that etymology or somewhere else?
Yes.
You found that too?
Down. A little bit.
Huh?
Yeah.
What?
It was down, like if you scroll
Yeah,
down.
it's way down there. Other meaning, other origins. It's a little bit speculative, but it's there anyway. Animosity. So this is a really important purport, I think. I'm going to read it one more time. Yoga practice, the process of purifying one's existential identity, is based mainly on self-control. Without self-control, one cannot practice freedom from animosity. Can we just discuss that for a minute? Yes. Manam, we need more expound.
We heard that one of the sitting places of Rudra is the breath. And Srila Prabhupada talked about how the manifestation of breath when you're angry. And we just heard that the etymological root of animosity, which took the meaning of soul or spirit in Latin, is from the word for breath. So yoga practice is, without self-control, one cannot practice freedom from animosity. Self-control in the yogic sense involves yama niyama and then ultimately some form of pranayama, and so you're controlling your breath. And so presumably, I mean, by the steps that I've been trying to present, the control of one's breath has some instrumental effect on the ability to, sama, to be equal, not see this person or deal with them as an enemy. So there's...
Well done. 1, 2.
The Niti Shastras explain that enemies and friends arise due to circumstances. So unless one is you've been speaking about this periodically, this ability just to detach from the subtle body. The mind many times is so absorbed in circumstances that our mental impressions of previous circumstances arise and create a story of what's going on. And unless there's a sense of self-control to be able to detach oneself from one's mental perceptions, ideas of friends and enemies will always arise. And those circumstances, like you see with this Russia and Ukraine conflict, practically most of the people involved are family members for generations and generations, but due to a circumstance, or America and Britain, there was the American Revolutionary War, now they're so-called allies. So according to circumstances, whatever facilitates one's sense gratification, whatever facilitates one's bodily identification, that creates the idea this is my enemy, my friend. But Prahlad Maharaj in the 7th canto, he explains that it's all illusion. The only thing that exists is everyone's a servant of Krishna.
Well done. More pramanam. Prabhupada Priya.
Hare Krishna. I was thinking of how this concepts of breath and spirit relate to animosity. And I was thinking that when someone says something that disturbs one's mind, then we might think that that person is like an enemy. And the impulse may be to react in an inimical way. But if the advice is that when such things happen, one should take a few deep breaths and then control the mind by breathing and calm oneself, and then not react with animosity. So that's one way. Another way is that, like in the Bhagavad Gita, it says that seeing in the mode of goodness is seeing or understanding. I'm not sure. Anyways, that when we see the undivided spiritual oneness of all beings, so that aspect, that common ground, that we're all spirit souls and that we all breathe, right? Like, I don't know if anyone's heard Govardhan's song. We all breathe air, we all eat food, we all breathe there, we all bleed blood, and we've all been there. Anyways, so it's kind of like this thing that we all breathe air, we're all souls, we're all having a human experience. And so instead of becoming inimical towards somebody, we can just kind of be like, yep, we're all struggling in this human form of life as conditioned souls, breathing air and trying to figure out our conditioned lives.
Yeah, nice connections. Thank you very much. Self-control, anybody? Yes.
I was reflecting on what we were talking about yesterday about anarthas. And in basic psychology, you see that any form of concealment can lead to projection. So, someone who's trying to repress things, some aspect of themselves, in our terms of spiritual life, some form of an anartha, as you were saying yesterday, not acknowledging that the anartha is existing and that it needs to be uprooted. You're giving the example of all these plants, and you're going out and watering all these anarthas and plants. So this idea of self-control, I'm also thinking about actually becoming very emotionally intelligent and conscious about what anarthas are within us, whether it's through association with other devotees or through deeper sadhana, through studying the Bhagavatam. But through this process of actually becoming more conscious of what's within our own heart, then we become much less eager to have what we're saying here, animosity towards others, where usually that just comes in the form of finding some fault in someone and projecting something that's generally a reflection of what's within our own heart. So I was thinking about
Thank you for taking from the psychological point of view. Suli, are you next?
Yes, Maharaj. This was reminding me of the cycle or chain of verses in the Bhagavad Gita that talk about dhyayato vishayan pumsam sangasteshu pajayate sangat sanjayate kama kamat krodho pajayate. So the anger or the Rudra principle is arising because I am identifying with the self or my idea of what I want or how I want to control the situation. So without self-control, I'll be lost in the circumstance of the world instead of really trying to identify who I am and how I should act on that platform. I'm maybe hearing or realizing from my recent failures to do that. But the self-control required cannot happen artificially. It needs to arise from that platform of realizing the real self or acknowledging that the circumstance is not the deciding factor, but the absolute truth should be the deciding factor of how we act. So then animosity will not arise because we will see that ultimately everyone's related to Krishna. So at least we will know we won't express or vent that frustration, but resolve it by submitting it to Krishna or surrendering to Krishna.
I think that's the latter point is especially because there is a way in which there may be Vegas, including anger arising and a sense of animosity. However, if one is able to notice that it's there and not be carried away by it, it can be, one can preempt it and not be taken in by it. The desire to say something, for instance, might arise, and then if one is practiced in self-control, it's a way in which he or she may then edit or just not say it, knowing well that it would escalate the situation and take it to another level. Those who don't have self-control, when the urge comes to say a word that will disturb the mind of others and then likely escalate the situation, the person would just give in to it and do it. But vachovegam, controlling speech, avoiding speech that offends, speaking truthfully and so forth, austerities, takes practice. So the urge may be there, we may notice it there, but then we may also have the wherewithal to separate that and say it's a different energy, it's just Rudra energy moving through, no need to entertain it or to use it for anything, just let it dissipate. I was thinking of raga dvesha vimuktaisthu vishayan indriyaishcharan atmavasharavadeya atma prasadam anigachtati. The very fact that Krishna mentions self-control following the, as he calls, the regulative principles of freedom, invites the mercy of the Lord. One becomes eligible to receive further enlightenment by the Lord's mercy. So the person is mindful of following what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita rather than overreacting. I recall also reading earlier about the Brahminical power of forgiveness and how that is a superpower. So there's a sense of the false ego being trampled, and then I want revenge, I feel animosity. But there's a way that if somebody's has developed all the qualities that many of you have already described, then they may not be obligated to take on that sense of revenge or resentment. Can just forgive the person in the moment when it's happening. Okay, 47. Everyone will be pleased with him because the personality of Godhead, the supreme controller of the universe, is always satisfied with the devotee who does not wish for anything beyond him. The supreme personality of Godhead is situated everywhere as the supersoul, and he can dictate to anyone and everyone he likes, as he likes. The would-be grandson of Diti, who is predicted to be a great devotee, would be liked by everyone, even by the enemies of his father, because he would have no other vision besides the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Good self-control, everybody. A pure devotee of the Lord sees the presence of his worshipable Lord everywhere. The Lord reciprocates in such a way that all living entities in whom the Lord is dwelling as a supersoul, also like a pure devotee of the Lord, is present. I'm confused. The Lord reciprocates in such a way that all living entities in whom the Lord is dwelling as the supersoul, also like a pure devotee, because the Lord is present in their hearts and can dictate to them to be friendly to his devotees. There are many instances in history wherein even the most ferocious animal became friendly to a pure devotee of the Lord. That topmost devotee of the Lord will have expanded intelligence and expanded influence and will be the greatest of the great souls. Due to matured devotional service, he will certainly be situated in transcendental ecstasy and will enter the spiritual sky after quitting this material world. Purport. There are 3 stages of transcendental development in devotional service, which are technically called sthai bhava, anubhava, and mahabhava. Continual perfect love of Godhead is called sthai bhava, and when it is performed in a particular type of transcendental relationship, it is called anubhava. But the stage of mahabhava is visible amongst the personal pleasure potential energies of the Lord. It is understood that the grandson of Diti, namely Prahlad Maharaj, would constantly meditate on the Lord and reiterate his activities. Because he would constantly remain in meditation, he would easily transfer himself to the spiritual world after quitting his material body. Such meditation is still more conveniently performed by chanting and hearing the holy name of the Lord. This is especially recommended in this age of Kali. He will be a virtuously qualified reservoir of all good qualities. He will be jolly and happy in others' happiness, distressed in others' distress, and will have no enemies. He will be a destroyer of the lamentation of all the universes, like the pleasant moon after the summer sun. Prahlad Maharaj, the exemplary devotee of the Lord, had all the good qualities humanly possible. Although he was the emperor of this world, he was not profligate. Beginning from his childhood, he was the reservoir of all good qualities. Without enumerating those qualities, it is said here summarily that he was endowed with all good qualities. That is the sign of a pure devotee. The most important characteristic of a pure devotee is that he is not lumpata or licentious. And another quality is that he is always eager to mitigate the miseries of suffering humanity. The most obnoxious misery of a living entity is his forgetfulness of Krishna. A pure devotee therefore always tries to evoke everyone's Krishna consciousness. This is the panacea for all miseries. You reacted to profligate?
I was just thinking earlier.
We looked it up, right? 50. Your grandson will be able to see inside and outside the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose wife is the beautiful goddess of fortune. The Lord can assume the form desired by the devotee, and his face is always beautifully decorated with earrings. Purport. Ready?
Yes.
Okay, 3 people are ready. It is predicted herewith that the grandson of Diti, Prahlad Maharaj, would not only see the personality of Godhead within himself by meditation, but would also be able to see him personally with his eyes. This direct vision is possible only for one who is highly elevated in Krishna consciousness. For the Lord, it is not possible to see with material eyes. The Supreme Personality of Godhead has This direct vision is possible for only one who is highly elevated in Krishna consciousness, for the Lord is not possible to see with material eyes. Different version you have?
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm sure I made a mistake. The Supreme Personality of Godhead has multifarious eternal forms such as Krishna, Baladev, Sankarsana, Aniruddha, Pradyumna, Vasudeva, Narayan, Rama, Nrsimha, Varaha, and Vaman. And the devotee of the Lord knows all those Vishnu forms. A pure devotee becomes attached to one of the eternal forms of the Lord, and the Lord is pleased to appear before him in the form desired. A devotee does not imagine something whimsical about the form of the Lord, nor does he ever think that the Lord is impersonal and can assume a form desired by the non-devotee. The non-devotee has no idea of the form of the Lord, and thus he cannot think of any one of the above-mentioned forms. The non-devotee has no idea of the form of the Lord, and thus cannot think of any one of the above-mentioned forms. You can interview people outside of a baseball game. Name one form of the Lord. What? Outside a baseball game they'd say that? They just say Jesus. They have no other idea about what other form of God there is. Burning bush. Is that what you're talking about? They'd have to be from 50 years ago to know that. I was just found it as a revelatory when I said it. That if you ask anybody anywhere, name 3 forms of the Lord, they'll look at you like you're crazy or you're a idolater or something like that, because the idea of the form of God has been so repressed in every Abrahamic iteration. There's a way that most people just think there is no form. The tracts Christians used to give us, one of the famous tracts had a throne with God on it, but it was just a light. There was just a light. There was no form. What do you think? Shall we try it? You go back to, let's go to Iowa and interview people out in the country. Yes? Summary process doesn't want to volunteer for that.
People might say, oh, like the universe is the form of the Lord, because people relate to that as we
California.
talked
Prayed to the universe, got a car. The non-devotee has no idea of the form of the Lord, and thus he cannot think of any one of the above-mentioned forms. But whenever a devotee sees the Lord, he sees him in a most beautifully decorated form, accompanied by his constant companion, the goddess of fortune, who is eternally beautiful. The sage Maitreya said, hearing that her grandson would be a great devotee and that her sons would be killed by Krishna, Diti was highly pleased in mind. It's a feel-good story. Purport. Diti was very aggrieved to learn that because of her untimely pregnancy, her sons would be demons and would fight with the Lord. But when she heard that her grandson would be a great devotee and that her 2 sons would be killed by the Lord, she was very pacified. As the wife of a great sage and the daughter of a great Prajapati, Daksha, she knew that being killed by the personality of Godhead is a great fortune. Since the Lord is absolute, his acts of violence and non-violence are both on the absolute platform. There is no difference in such acts of the Lord. Mundane violence and non-violence have nothing to do with the Lord's acts. A demon killed by him attains the same result as one who attains liberation after many, many births of penance and austerity. The word brisham is significant herein because it indicates that Diti was pleased beyond her expectations. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 3rd canto, 14th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Pregnancy of Diti in the Evening. Bravo. Bravissimo. Sadhu, sadhu. Victory. Tato Jayam Udirayat. I wonder if they're the only ones on the planet who just read that whole chapter at this time, out of all the billions of people on the earth. It's possible. Okay, we have about 2-3 minutes for a final...
Hare Krishna.
Yes, please.
I'm just extracting a little bit of a lesson from this exchange in this particular chapter, that if one transgresses basic principles of morality, you have to deal with the consequences, but simultaneously it's not that mercy can't be involved in the midst of having to manage those consequences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Nice point. It comes out really loud and clear here. Of course, one should not then commit the seventh offense and think, because such blatant disregard for proper behavior, thinking that it can be rectified is an offense. Who has the mic? Karvena will go to Samya Prash.
38th purport, Prabhupada says that like he explained that how the situation in Kali Yuga is so bad, and then he says that certainly unwanted children cannot be source of happiness in society, but through the Krishna conscious movement they can be raised to the human standard by chanting the holy name of the Lord. That is a unique contribution of Lord Chaitanya to the human society. So it's I can feel that that's such a important contribution that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement is doing to society, that raising the people to the God conscious or Krishna conscious life, and at least to the human standard, what Prabhupada says in this purport, and then further.
Yeah, before here we had a program at Salesforce. So anybody, you were there, right? Who was there? Downtown. Anyway, we were in this big building. It's the biggest building in San Francisco. Huge corporation. And we rented a big hall inside the building and had a program. And we had a Harinam Kirtan inside. And it was just noticing the contrast and thinking that what you just said, the aptness of that there's nothing like the holy name that can break through the bondage of hard work caused by one's karma.
I was musing this on the nature of responsibility. Kashyapa Muni they both made a mistake, but Prabhupada has made much of, the woman has a nature there's a certain amount of fallibility there, and she's supposed to be following him. But in verse 38, Kashyapa Muni has a lot to say about how her mind is polluted, the time was polluted because of defilement, she neglected his direction, all these things that she did wrong. He doesn't say anything about what he did, because, he could have just said no. Obviously he was implicated, it's not so simple, but there's much made of her responsibility. And how do we understand that in this relationship where she's supposed to be following him, the fundamental mistake, it seems to me, is actually his, because he's supposed to know better, and he didn't actually go with the higher knowledge that he's supposed to have. He's supposed to be the Brahman, he's supposed to have this wisdom. They made a mistake together, but she's the one who's fallen, and et cetera, apparently. And it seems like it's almost missing something. Like, actually, to me, it seems like it's more his fault than hers. But the way he presents it, it's like, well, you really made a mistake here. But good news, you've been saved. But it feels like responsibility the consequence has to do more with who has the higher knowledge and who has more agency in the situation. And if they're not exactly equal, if there's actually like a power relationship, then wouldn't he be more culpable than her?
It was implied earlier. It seems inordinate at the end just to come down on her, but it was mentioned earlier. That's why the question came up, if, as Prabhupada had mentioned, or maybe even the verse mentioned, that he was not strong enough to overcome a request. He was disparaged at that point, that he had given in because of his weakness. So the responsibility was somewhat distributed there. It's just at the end you hear more about her than him. Yes? I
mean, we hear about his weakness from Prabhupada. We don't hear Kashyapa admitting, anything like, I'm really sorry that I didn't have the strength to, not, the strength to like prevent this from happening to us. Right? One would think that he would also take responsibility for the act and not just blame her. That, because you were like this and you did this wrong and you did that wrong, now you're going to suffer. takes two to tango, in other words.
Mahendra.
Yeah, Srila Prabhupada, a few times actually, he mentioned that he was already inclined and he wanted it, and therefore he didn't refuse. But at the same time, according to the Dharma Shastras, that was his duty to fulfill her desire, even if it was in the proper time. So what he stated after that, it wasn't like a blaming. He was just stating what happened, and because you want it like that and it happened in this way. So, and he fulfilled his duty, basically. And there's no point of actually saying, well, it was my fault ultimately because I could have refused it, because that's also against Dharma. So, I mean, that should be considered also.
So it's almost like...
Wait. Go ahead.
Also, Guru Maharaj, it is said in this verse here, understanding his wife's purpose, he was obliged to perform the forbidden act, and thus after offering his obeisances unto worshipable fate, he lay with her in a secluded place. In the purport also, Srila Prabhupada says that although he knew that Lord Shiva would not be pleased with him for such a forbidden act, he was obliged to act by his wife's desire. There was some obligation, feels like, which is not mentioned, I think.
That's what the last point Mahendra Prabhu was. Bana, did you have a point? Yeah. Okay.
I have trouble believing that because it's his dharmic duty to provide her with a child. It's his dharmic duty to do it at her whim when she says she wants it, even though he knows better. It seems like it's like maybe we can say on some level he's letting her learn a lesson for making a mistake.
Well, if I can interject, this is not being presented as dharmic, it's being presented as adharmic. And within that context, he made a mistake. And there's a consequence for it. Of course, there's a mitigation in the sense that they'll be killed by the Lord, the sons, and that they'll also have a grandson who's like no other. But there's no sense in the overall text that he didn't fall down. Although in the continuation of the conversation, it's not mentioned that he admitted fault, he blamed her. But the overall context is disparaging of the whole situation. So that includes his not doing the right thing. Just because he said, you induced me, given the fact that it was admitted that he was weak earlier, it indicates a fall down on Kashyap's part from the text. That he didn't admit it is the main problem in this point, but at that point he was already fallen. He gave in to, he wasn't self-controlled. That's there in the text, that he wasn't up to the task, and that one should be up to the task. So if he fell down in that point, his continuance of the improper mentality could also be said to be part of that not being strong enough in that sense. Mahendra.
To add that, I think his fall down was that he wasn't strong to convince her to wait with her desire. But it's not mentioned that the act was sinful or something. It was just in proper time, and there will be consequences for that. But he did his duty. That's specifically said in the Dharma Shastras, like Manu Samhita, others. It's the wife's desires which defines the moment. But also there are other prescriptions that there are good times, etc. Garbhadhana samskara. But the husband is obliged. That's what Prabhupada means. So in that sense, he did right, but he wasn't strong enough to convince her to wait. He just mentioned, but she was insisting, so he said, all right.
Sure. Mana can close the conversation. Either that, if you'd like to take a lunch break to continue it, you can do that too. Go ahead.
He didn't disagree with and say, I'm not going to fulfill your desire. He says, I will, but simply wait. So he could have simply waited anyway. I don't want to go. So the aspect of, I just wanted to mention how all of this is enabling this incredible pastime of the Lord to take place. And I just kind of want to mention that this is all the foreground of enabling this incredible pastime of Lord Varaha, the birth of the demon Hiranyaksha getting killed and everything.
Can we leave it there? Your point provocative, and we'll go on. Go ahead.
It won't be provocative.
Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking similarly that when Kashyapa offered his obeisances to fate, he understood this was the will of the Lord, which it was. And then I just wanted to add that I always marveled at how Diti was she was like very elated by the fact that by the news that her children would be killed by the Lord. So I think that's kind of like indicative of her like enlightened consciousness, because what mother would be happy to hear that her kids are both going to get murdered by the Lord or otherwise? But she's like, oh, the Lord's going to kill them? All right, great, fantastic. It's all good then.
And one final thought, perhaps helpful, is that the Bhagavatam, as I was saying last night, presents all manners of human psychology so that we can observe them in ourselves and look at them. Not everything is neatly tied down into a dharmic situation, but we may see loose ends in various places where we can identify with these things as happening in human society. At some point or another, they're rectified. Whether it's we feel something wanting in somebody, or they didn't express it in the way that they might express something or do something that's shocking, that there's a resolution of it in the context of Krishna consciousness. So you have to stand by. Dear Srila Prabhupada, dear Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Shri Shri Panchatattva, Shri Shri Radha Madan Mohan, Shri Shri Radha Govinda, Shri Shri Radha Gopinath, 18 Thakur. If you so desire, please give us the intelligence and the heart to enter deeply within the meanings of Srimad Bhagavatam and all of their nuances in such a way that it unties the knots within our hearts of attachment to the material world. Om Tat Sat, the material world. Om Tat Sat. All who agree with this prayer in whole or in part, please unmute and say Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Gaur Premanande Nitai Gaura Haribo 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo Nitai Gaura Haribo 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo. Vanchakalpadurvishcha kripasindave vachapatitanam bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Now we can discuss over lunch.